Public policy advisory. Advisory for public policy advisory. Ça va? Oui, avec Spain. Ça va bien? Écoute,
Surname pronounced Millerud.
Yes, perfect. I get many versions, but that's good.
Using my Bulgarian pronunciation.
Where are you from? I had
Oh,
asked you
thank
from
you.
Bulgaria. Oh, thanks. It's good to have one as a.
Can you go with me on the floor?
That's all right. I'll keep it here.
You could have the. Oh, yeah.
I'm from Lebanon. But it really feels I'm from here. It's been, what, 24 years. Alrighty.
Good to go?
Okay.
Good afternoon to everybody who's still at GITEX with us. Today we have a very interesting panel discussion. It's about the socio-economic benefits of investing into digital infrastructure. It's a topic that in the current digital age, it's becoming more popular, how investments in digital infrastructure can pay off to societies and countries themselves. So for this particular discussion, I have myself, Ivan Petrov, Senior Manager at Hasna. So Hasna is the largest developer and operator in the UAE and in the regions. Together with me, I have Philippe Nahas, who is a partner at White Shield, an AI company that is primarily focused on assessing the socio-economic benefits for our clients and for societies. And also Johan Millerud, who is a Senior Director of Platforms. He's going to talk about the impact of investing in digital infrastructure and that they pave the way for the UAE and for the MENA region to flourish as societies. So let's dive into a conversation. We have a few topics to cover, and let's make sure that we are able to cover as much as we can. The first one is covering the strategic role of digital infrastructure. So Johan, if I may start with you, my first question is, how do you, from your experience, how do data center underpin industries, and how do they enable the digital economy of societies?
Yeah, good. Well, thanks first of all, Ivan, for the introduction. Nice to have you here, Philippe. And thank you to all the audience for being here. It feels a bit strange because I don't really hear myself, but hopefully the volume is good and the double espresso I had doesn't translate to too quick talking. Yeah, so we're obviously here talking about digital infrastructure, and and how critical it is for this digital age. And I think UK recently announced, I think it's the last in many countries, who has classified data center as critical infrastructure. Now that just, of course, demonstrates the relevance and the importance of data centers in this digital economy, which means basically that data centers are classified same strategic level as highways, railways, utilities, airports, like strategic and critical infrastructure for a country. And we know that, being in the data center industry, that data centers really are the sort of the gravitational epicenter of this digital economy. And I like to use the analogy of sort of what airports are, and when an airport has been to Dubai, because we are here in Dubai. What has that been? An airport is just a building with some runways and control towers. But what that physical infrastructure has done for Dubai and the UAE, not just being that building where planes can land, passengers can interact, but how that has transpired not only to the tourism industry, to the trade, and how that has ripple effects across the economy, which I think is a good analogy to the data center, which is, again, just a building, some power and cooling, very simple, Lego, put it together and offer the service. And obviously has direct impact on the economy and the society, but how that trickles down across various sectors and how it enables countries to get at the forefront of this digital age. So I think that's sort of the summary.
Thank you, Johan, for explaining it. I totally agree that data center really paved the way as becoming the next infrastructure pillar for society and even for the whole economy, for the industries. Felipe, can you speak about direct and indirect social economic impacts to data centers and the economic benefits that they bring to society, the value created?
Absolutely. So maybe I'll just use my notes here because I keep forgetting the numbers. So if you see me peeking here, I'm just remembering my figures. So to begin with, if I talk about the importance of data centers and infrastructure across the board on the economy. So let's start with a direct impact. And I'm going to talk about the economy first, we'll talk about society in a bit. But if I talk about direct impact on the economy, let's talk about the impact on the digital economy of a country. Now, if I were to look at the OECD average, as far back as May this year, you would see that economies within the OECD have a growth factor of 6.3% per annum on average for their digital economies. And that is 3x the average growth of the economy at large. So empowering the digital economy within a country is a very important thing, and it should be definitely it is a direct impact of data centers. We shouldn't overlook that. Now, if I look at the impact of that, one thing that we have to keep in mind is that yes, you have direct impact on the economy, you have indirect impact on the economy as well. The indirect impacts come with basically across all sectors. And if I were to take it down specifically to a more direct correlation, talking specifically about AI, okay, you'll see that I'm going to give one example on AI investments. In 2022, globally, we saw about $1.3 billion of investments in AI. In 2023, that number was 17 plus billion. If I'm not mistaken, it's closer to 18 billion. Okay. And that investment has been all concentrated in very few economies. And what happens eventually is that the countries that are investing in infrastructure to support that boom in AI are the ones that are going to benefit across all sectors where AI is applied. And I'm giving just that one example. Now, if we were to talk a bit about less obvious, or I'd say indirect effects, then we can talk about the society impact. And specifically, I'm going to talk about labor here, because what we see is a major boost in the labor labor market wherever there is a thriving data center economy. I'm going to give one example, which is Google. All right, so in order to serve their own customers, they started building data centers of their own in 2006 in the US. Okay, and they currently have 12 data centers in North America. Now, these data centers, and we're not talking even currently, we're talking back as far back as 2020, they account for about 58,000 jobs. Now, the interesting part is that the top four categories of these jobs, okay, account for about 80% of that job creation, so 40,000 jobs. And these are not just in IT or construction. You'll find these jobs spreading across healthcare, across transport, across trade, across the board, and they're not localized to the states where these data centers are being built. So just by using that example, what I want to illustrate is that the indirect benefits are massive, and the indirect impact, socio-economic impact, is quite substantial.
Well, thank you. That's certainly very inspiring to hear. But can you also, as a follow-up, just substantiate your claims in terms of which example economies would you say that have shown the greatest benefit from their investments into digital infrastructure?
Very good. Maybe I'll talk about what we call the internet hubs of the world, and I'm going to take out of the several hubs that exist out there. Maybe we talk about the likes of going east to west, Singapore, Frankfurt, Amsterdam, and London. Now, because these are the internet hubs that connect to the UAE, since we're here in Dubai, quite relevant to talk about these. And in particular, one example that I really like is Amsterdam, because they grew into a regional and multi-regional even internet hub and a data hub by building positively on their position as a trade route and a trade hub going back to historical times, so hundreds of years back. And they've used their business hub success recipe across the digital world, meaning that it wasn't only about leveraging their location, but also about an open regulation on the digital side in the same way as it was in trade and commerce. And looking forward, they have started a strategy around sustainability, which is what they call the spatial spatial strategy for DC 2030 actually. Now, if I were to look at it in the numbers, it's interesting to see that in Amsterdam you have about 10,000 jobs that revolve around data centers and cloud. So that's purely in the data center market, but these support 2 million jobs in the digital world. So if you were to look at jobs related to digital in the Netherlands, you've got 2 million jobs that rely on a data center market that employs 10,000 people. Looking into how this attracts foreign direct investments to the country, 20% of FDI in the Netherlands is actually related to either cloud or data center specifically. And finally, if I look at all of that picture, it actually contributes to 1.6% of the country's GDP. And that's a fantastic contribution. If you look at it, being anywhere above 1% is massive.
Thank you, man. It's always good to back up claims with some numbers and making sure that there's some examples to showcase that what we're saying is, what we're discussing today is based on some factual data.
Thank you.
So we can now shift a bit more into the digital infrastructure and the transformation aspect of it. Philip, can I just stay with you for this one?
Sure.
From a regulatory standpoint, what do you think is the main role the government plays into that investment into the infrastructure? How does it facilitate that?
All right, so if I were to look at the role of governments across the board, and I'm talking here at a global level, I think it's very important to strike the right balance. One, in terms of fostering a competitive environment that's positively competitive within the country, within the players of the country, but also within the region. And two, aiming to serve the region, not just the country itself. So we look at the regulation across the pure tech side, so regulated versus deregulated pricing, the establishment of free zones when you want to serve a greater market, such as what the UAE did here to overcome the initial regulated pricing that was prevalent across the local market, and to be able to serve the international markets, they basically mapped the exact same concept of the Jabal Ali free zone, for instance, to the digital side. So the same way you can bring cars into the free zone, and these cars can be both left-hand drive and right-hand drive, so not necessarily compatible with the local market. You would be able to store them within the free zone without paying any royalties or fees on them. They've applied the exact same concept to the digital world, where data centers that sit in a digital free zone can serve the whole region, and you can have the likes of Netflix, for instance, being able to serve the region from the UAE by storing content that may or may not be copyrighted for distribution inside the UAE, and by being able to do this at a fraction of the cost that it would have been to be inland and stream such massive content. So that's to give an example of the typical regulation bit, but way beyond. So two elements that I have mentioned that I would like to illustrate. You've got the purely economic side of it, the pricing factor, the access, the fair and equal access to infrastructure, but also you have the longer term thinking, one around intellectual property and intellectual rights and privacy protection, but also looking at sustainable growth and having the policies in place to foster a sustainable growth within the country. So looking at the whole ecosystem that serves data centers and not just at the data center itself.
Thank you, Stephen, for providing this insights. And maybe to add on top of what Felipe is saying, from an industrial perspective, what do you think are the lessons learned that from the UAE's digital transformation journey? And maybe we can give an example of how Hasna has actually played a part into that.
Yeah, no, I think actually to start with, so we actually worked with White Shield to release a report, a white paper a couple of months ago, where one element of that was at the data center attractiveness index that we were trying to, and it's fundamentally three factors that you can sort of influence and that impacts the attractiveness, which is the supply, demand, and policy. And these are obviously very interdependent. Sometimes supply comes, especially here in Dubai, sometimes supply comes, you need the supply to get the demand, sometimes demand comes first, and it's always this dynamism between these three elements. And I think what's interesting in what the UAE has done in Dubai is actually having a good, first of all, a very clear vision of where it wants to be, but also being dynamic enough to play with these different, these three in terms of the supply, demand, in terms of the policy. So I think some of the examples that Philippe was talking about, we were fortunate enough, when I came to the UAE about 12 years, we were working on one of these projects, which was clear. There was a vision of establishing UAE and Dubai as a hub, digital hub for the region. Now you can either chuck in money and just start building it, but what really happened there was that the private sector where we were working was given some freedom in terms of finding the right boundaries within some confined boundary, how to build what was essentially a transit zone, which is what Philip referred to here, which has really become a blueprint for the region now. So that is an example where in the UAE you stepped in, but you let the private market sort of find a solution that was within the bounds of policy, and actually was some changes to policy. The other, in the example of where we are now, and actually from Kasna's history, we are also an example of how you can look at the UAE was very early in terms of the region of realizing that the country needs solid infrastructure on the ground when it comes to data center. So Kasna was established by Mubadala, which is a sovereign wealth fund of, okay, we don't see anyone doing this, we need someone to build this critical infrastructure here. So Kasna was born out of that vision that, data centers are not, you don't turn that around and start them becoming economically viable within 3 years. That's a long-term commitment. So I think that's, there's a lot of learning from the UAE, not just from the digital, but which applies to this. to the digital space. And I think what's fascinating here is that I feel that the leadership finds the right way, which levers to pull to really drive the market.
Thank you, and thank you for providing the insights around the policy and the lessons learned that QE can be used as an example of. So now let's focus on an area that is very topical in this conversation, meaning AI and the future of the digital infrastructure. So stick with you, Johan. So in terms of the increased demands that AI has on the data center infrastructure, what would you say are the responses from the data center industry in terms of how that infrastructure is changing? And maybe give a bit more context into how the data centers evolve to really meet the needs of AI today and also in the future.
Yeah, I don't think the data center as a product, and when I'm saying data center, I'm talking about the infrastructure side, not the full stack. I think there's really three elements that are changing at the moment and will be crucial for the future. One is energy or power. There is an increased demand for power. I think today the global data center sector takes up around 0.5 or something percentage of total power generation globally. That is likely, with some unconstrained development, looking to reach 4 to 5% by 2030. Now that is of course an enormous challenge for the energy sector to actually start to build that generation. So energy is certainly one of the critical ones. The other, I think, is how AI is going to evolve from now being very focused on training, large AI campuses being built globally to cater for this. We're talking gigawatt campuses. How that transition is going to be from training to inference, and how the data center market is going to evolve with that in terms of edge, and how much can you actually compute on your device versus what sits in the mobile tower. So I think that is going to change. There's a lot of investment going into these large data center campuses now, but the edge and how that's going to play in, whether the old legacy data centers are going to be the new edge, or so. I think that's the second one. The third one is actually how the data center industry embrace AI in our processes, in our design, in how we automate. So I think we're not only building for AI, but we also need to take AI to help us build for itself. So I think those three, I think, are the main ones for the foreseeable future.
Thank you. And then just to keep on the last point, can you give some examples of any particular technological advancements that happen in the data centers, like cooling or designs?
I mean, AI or high density compute is only going to be sustainable with liquid cooling. I think that the jury's out on that. How that technology will evolve is, I think, still remains to be seen. And we actually have a demonstration of liquid cooling or a CDU at our stand today, which is quite interesting to see how the plumbing actually works within. So I think liquid cooling is certainly one, but also how the actual design and the architecture of our data centers, they're probably going to be multi-story buildings in terms of catering for some of these clusters, which is like one big nervous system that needs to connect with each other. So, but yeah, the one that now is at the top of everybody's mind is the cooling, how to cool down racks that consume 10 times more power and produce 10 times more heat than 5 years ago.
Yeah, thank you for explaining it. And just to move away from the technical, how AI changes the data center, into the socio-economic impact. So Felipe, just to demystify this a bit, the World Economic Forum is claiming that AI will generate a net gain of 12 million jobs by 2025. How do you see data center infrastructure playing a key role in supporting such projected growth? And what are the considerations in that area?
Okay, thanks. That's a very pertinent question, actually. I think you mentioned all of the technological advancements that are needed to sustain that explosion in the demand for AI, be it in terms of cooling or in terms of energy. And I think that is one big part of the picture, that the infrastructure preparedness across the board, or the infrastructure readiness of a country to support the growth of AI, is very highly correlated with the labor market readiness to embrace AI. So the fact is, if you look at all the countries that are currently ready from a skills and labor market perspective to make the most of AI and to embrace the AI economy, to call it as such, you will find that there's an 88% correlation between that labor market readiness and the preparedness of their infrastructure to support the growth of AI. So that's a massive, massive point here. Now, if I were to break down, the AI impact on economy, okay, we've spoken about the labor market readiness to go into AI, but what does that mean effectively? That means you're ready to look at the three types of impact that AI has on your labor market. Number one, it will cannibalize jobs, and it will cause cannibalization specifically for jobs that rely mostly on repetitive tasks. So you have to be ready for that shift happening. Number two is that it will create jobs specifically in the digital sector, but also across the board, and these are going to be more AI-related jobs. So you've got a cannibalization, you have a fresh creation, and you have a shift of skills required to be able to fulfill your job. And so if we look at the demand in the market today, and we've run quite a bit of research with some of our tools looking at the specific skills that are required in the labor market, and we see a massive growth in the number of AI-related skills, prompt engineering, understanding of tools, machine learning, modeling, etc. And these are happening. So what countries need to ensure is that they have the right infrastructure to support the growth of AI in country. Your market is going to go and consume AI, whether you're growing it in country or whether they have to rely on foreign players to supply them with that artificial intelligence. And the studies that we've done show that by 2030, the countries that are net exporters of AI, the countries that have a strong AI economy and digital economy, are going to create 4.8 times more jobs than the laggards, countries that will rely on others to supply the AI as they are purely consumer of them. And this is a very important point, because that means your labor market is going to suffer, and you're going to feel the cannibalization unless you're part of the AI economy.
That's a clear message that investing in AI needs to
Absolutely.
be pumped up as much as possible. Moving on to another important topic, which is sustainability and the long-term economic impact of that. Felipe, staying with you on this one,
Sure.
is what do you think are some initiatives and policies that are being introduced to ensure that sustainability is achieved, or also be adhered to from industries?
Okay. So if I were to look at this, I would again try to look at it from two perspectives. One, we're going to talk about ecological sustainability. We're going to talk about the ability to supply the power or the energy requirements that are booming and that AI will keep on requesting. And that's mostly going to be about how we run the right policies to encourage sustainable development goals and sustainable technologies that support us. So if we talk about liquid cooling, if we talk about alternative energy, and we talk specifically looking at the UAE, the shift away from fossil fuels for electricity generation, which is quite counterintuitive for a country that is a massive producer of oil, and the shift towards both pure green energy, solar, wind, as well as nuclear. That is a way, that basically shows you a government that's looking way ahead at being able to provide for the energy, the massive energy needs, with a portfolio of sources that are sustainable. That'd be number one. Number two would be more on the socio-economic side and the society side of things, and then we go back to the labor market and that shift in skills demand that we see. How do you make up for this? Well, again, a lot of the work that we're doing in the region and in the UAE specifically consists of helping the tertiary education system, whether it's universities or whether it's training institutes, look at what the requirement of specific skills is going to be in the market, and specifically if we look at technical jobs 5 years from today, and adapting the curriculum to make sure that your current youth and students are the graduates of the future that your labor market needs, and not purely formed academically separately from the needs of the market. I think these are the two aspects to look at most importantly.
Very interesting. I think talent is certainly something that needs to be a key focus, especially for the era of AI where things are changing even quicker than what we're used to. Johan, so Hasna has adopted a future first strategy. Can you just delve a bit more into this and just explain a bit how do we balance economic growth with achieving sustainable impacts from a data center perspective, but also broader industrial perspective?
Yeah. No, we, like you said, we have a future first strategy, which goes into those. And we, as Kasna, we build infrastructure that's supposed to last for 20 to 25 years. So sustainability has sort of been at the DNA of what we do from the outset. We're going on for 10 years. So we certainly have that's sort of where we're going. It's in our DNA, and we have our future. We also know that the landscape is changing, partly because of this huge demand of power for AI, and how do you balance that with the sustainability requirement of transition to renewable, low carbon. So we are devising our new strategy. We're sort of trying to find the right balance of that for how we should play in the future in this. We can't get away from that. Data centers are going to need energy, otherwise it's not a data center. But really how we are positioning ourselves is really to be a catalyst into the market, because we can't cascade down into the supply chain the requirements, whether that's in the energy sector in terms of what our demands are in order to enable international clients to deploy in our data center in say UAE. We can make those demands, and we can make them strong, because this is critical for UAE as a country. But also to our huge supply chain, to our contractors, to any other suppliers that we have, to always work with renewable, following all the ESG. So how we see ourselves is this is an industry challenge, and we alone are not going to challenge. I think the most impact we can have is how we just act as that catalyst and that leader in the market to sort of cascade down those requirements. And I think that's the most impactful role we can play, apart from everything that we're in control of, which is power usage efficiency is a key metric for us, which is basically how much power in and how much do you actually transfer to productive power for the client. And of course we are doing a lot within our control, whether that's biofuel for our on-site power, the liquid cooling, adiabatic cooling, and just keeping very tight on our waste management and working with partners. But again, I think our real impact is going to come from how we trickle that down across the industry as a whole.
I think what you're saying is it really needs to go from end to end around the supply chain, achieving that sustainable circular economy, for this to really have an impact on sustainable commitments. So last but not least, I wanted us to touch on the aspect of GITEX, which is really important, especially now that AI becomes more and more prevalent in our daily work and daily life as well. So a question to both of you, as we embrace AI and digitalization, what would you, in your experience, from your work, what do you think of the ethical and risk considerations that need to be considered and seriously thought of when solved down the line? Felipe,
Okay, fantastic. So being from an advisory background, maybe I'll start with the typical risks that I see around IP rights protection, around privacy protection, but also around bias in what we see in the results that we get from AI, and the potential for abuse when the AI falls in the hand of threat actors. So the question is, how do we, as policy and as individuals, how do we guard against this? The idea is around, I'm going to start with bias, and the idea is around fighting bias with clean training sets and more focused training. So if I were to talk about an example of that, okay, and not at all from an ethical or from a risk perspective to guard against potential abuse, but rather in order to get better results, one thing that we do in-house as a firm is we train our own LLM on a set of public policies that we harvest from trusted sources. And we instruct the LLM to give us answers that are always quantified and that refer to the source at every point in time. And that's something that we see now in GPT-4o that quotes every single source, which I love because it makes it so much more usable, so much more trustworthy per se. If I were to talk about IP rights and privacy rights, I think these have been tackled so far in the digital world in terms of privacy rights. It was a matter of, how do I ensure that social media doesn't disseminate my data? Today, we're in the same sort of conundrum about how do I make sure that AI isn't learning from my private information, that it's not taking anything that I should not be divulging. And I think it's a mix of more awareness among the cyber players within companies, within the content owners, and a clear-cut policy from the governments to be able to curb that across multiple territories. So, going back to the example of GDPR and being able to apply that to an AI training set is challenging, but not impossible. So we're headed in that direction today. And finally, if I were to talk about one last problem, which is, how do you ensure that AI doesn't fall in the hands of threat actors and is not used for abuse, for your typical scams, etc. And there was an example of a Microsoft employee who basically got a call about his personal Gmail account that was so realistic that he had absolutely no idea of knowing. He was talking to an AI agent that was maliciously tuned to go and try to harvest his information, until he mistakenly repeated the same answer twice and got an anomalous response from the AI. So as AI gets better and we're completely unable to distinguish from whether we're communicating with a person or with an AI engine, I think the only way going forward is to mandate clear content watermarks when a content is generated by AI, whether we're talking about a text response that you see on ChatGPT, or whether we're talking about an image that's generated, or whether we're talking about a voice that you hear at the other end of the line. That should be the way going forward, in my view at least.
Maybe I'll just finish up because my espresso is starting to sort of down my caffeine level, and I think we're sort of running out of time. But I'm going to paraphrase my colleague who was just up on stage earlier, who said the best way to get to avoid bad AI is good AI, and I think that says a lot. And I think we're fortunate to be part of G42, the group, who is working so close together with us with different market players, and have launched now recently with Microsoft, establishing a center in the UAE for responsible AI and AI for good. And it can only happen using the good AI to combat the bad AI with the countries and market actors coming together and solve this. So I think that's my few last cents on that.
Thank you very much, Bob. And with this will be the end of our final discussion. I want to thank you, Felipe, for your brilliant insights and also for the audience for